All right. In this video, I want to talk about sowing to the flesh and sowing to the spirit. Hence the title and hence the picture here. Now, the reason why I want to get into this is because of the context. I was reading through this and thinking about this. Verse 8 here says, "For he that soweth to his flesh shall of his flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." Now, if we take that, and we also look at what he says down here, at verse 12, he says, "As many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer persecution for the cross' sake. For neither they themselves who are circumcised keep the law, but desire to have you circumcised, that they may glory in your flesh." Right? We need to take this into context of what Paul has been saying throughout the letter to the Galatians here. As we look over here in Galatians chapter 3, he's talking to them about being foolish because they have been brought Jesus Christ crucified among them. They've been given the gospel that Jesus Christ died for their sins, was buried and rose again the third day. Right? That's your whole life. Jesus is taken care of because he's not bound by time. He died for the sins of the past, the present, and the future. He died for your past, present, and future. Right? And that's what he talks about in the first chapter, about them going after another gospel. And he asks them, "Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh?" So we get right here an idea of what he means about the flesh and the Spirit. By the Spirit, he's saying that you're walking by faith, not by sight. Right? And walking by the law is walking by the flesh, walking by sight, not by faith. Following along here? And you can read that throughout here as he talks about those who are of the works of the law under the curse, that they have to do everything that is written in it. Right? And if they don't, well, they're obviously condemned. Because if you break the law in one part, you're guilty of all. But as it says here, no man is justified in the sight of God by the law. It is evident that the just shall live by faith. Now, you can be just in front of man by keeping the law, because a lot of people, that's how we judge people, by how they're keeping God's law and man's law, right? So we say that they're just, but doesn't mean they're just before God, right? Because to be just before God, you have to be perfect. And the only way you can be perfect is if you believe the gospel and you have received God's righteousness, as Paul actually talks about in Philippians chapter 3. But anyway, back to this here, we get an idea of the Spirit and the flesh. So when we come back here, we get an idea of what Paul's talking about. If you want to apply it to yourself, it's about whether or not you're walking by faith or by sight. You're walking by faith in what God did, or are you walking by your own ability to keep the law, right? But like we read here, the context is not about you, right? As he mentions here about those who are circumcised, then they want you circumcised so that they can boast in your flesh, right? Because all those who are circumcised are debtors to keep the whole law. They're under the curse, right? It's not just about circumcision, as some people will take that and isolate it. See, they're just talking about circumcision. No, he's talking about the whole law. The 10 Commandments, the judgments that go along with it, and the ceremonies to get cleansed. He's talking about all of it. The whole law, which would include circumcision, right? So if you're going to get circumcised because you want to keep the law, well, then you got to keep all of it. Because if you break in one point, you're guilty of all. So don't waste your time doing something like that unless you're going to go all the way, right? But as Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, that he counts his righteousness by the law, which is blameless, by the way. He counts it but dung, that he can win the righteousness which is by faith, the faith of Christ, which is the righteousness of God by faith. And what we actually see being said here, since we don't reap ourselves is talking about what Paul is doing. Like, he is not preaching to everybody to go get physically circumcised and to keep the law. That would be sowing to his flesh, right? Because he would be walking by sight. Look at all these obedient followers I have that are obeying the law. He'd be able to boast in them by that, right? But he's like, no, you got to sow in the Spirit. So you sow faith, and then you will reap life everlasting. And this is not talking about yourself, because he says if you're not wary, you'll reap in due season. You don't reap yourself. He's talking about you're reaping a harvest of what you sowed among others. Are you sowing the law to others that they have to keep the law? Because if you are, you're going to reap corruption because they got to do it perfectly. If they don't keep it perfectly, they're condemned. And that's why you're going to have corruption, because they're going to die incorrupt, die in their sins. But if you're sowing faith among the people, faith in the gospel, faith in what Jesus Christ has done for us, in the loving mercy and grace of God, then you will reap life everlasting. They will live. So I just wanted to make this video just to quickly sum that up and break down the context. Just a quick conclusion to go over it. It's not, you don't sow to yourself. You sow among other people like Jesus did. He sowed the seeds among different soils, which represents your hearts and minds, right? And your hearts and minds are all different, so the seed lands on different types of soil, and different things happen because of that. But you could be sowing to the flesh, which is walking by sight, going by the law, which is just going to condemn everybody. Or you can be sowing faith among people, which will reap life everlasting. And this has a connection to your reward. Your reward will be others. Jesus' reward for dying is us, other people. That's his only benefit, is he gets us, the believers. So when you talk about rewards in heaven, some people get very selfish and thinking about all the cool stuff they could have. But what about other people? Other people that you help lead to Jesus, your family and friends that you are a good influence to and shine light to, they get to go to heaven with you. Right? That would be an awesome reward, right? That would be something you want to reap. That's what Paul actually talks about. I actually think he says it in Philippians, where he talks about them being his crown. And that's what we're rewarded with, a crown, right? And he's actually saying the believers are his crown. So, yeah, something to think about. Thanks for watching, and take care.